Hello, welcome to Dialogue. I'm Pan Dong in Beijing. In recent years, online charity has been gaining popularity in many countries, providing broader platforms and rich resources. However, new problems are emerging along with its rise, such as donation fraud and abuse of social media. In China, the online donation scandal of a child in a southern Shenzhen city garnered attention nationwide, inviting a question whether online giving is trustworthy. So, who has the right to initiate online charitable donations, and how can the online donation process be monitored to ensure effectiveness and credibility? To discuss these issues and more, I'm pleased to join in the studio by social cause contributor Han Hua and the managing director of Lehman Lee and Xu law firm, Edward Lehman. But before we get started, let's take a look at this.
Luo Yixiao is 5 years old and she has leukemia. On November 25th, her father posts this appeal on WeChat. Luo R is a writer and journalist in the southern city of Shenzhen. His daughter's treatment costs at least 10,000 yuan a day. The article goes viral and donations come pouring in, especially after Luo says financial consultancy company Xiaotongren has agreed to donate 1 yuan for each repost and share. In 4 days, the post was shared over 500,000 times. People sent the company over 100,000 yuan, and Luo R raised over 2 million yuan.
We raised over 2.4 million yuan in 2 to 3 hours, and we felt things were no longer the same. I thought it was over 200,000, but then I saw it was over 2 million, and I knew it was going to explode.
Here's why Luo was worried. He's said to own 3 houses, a car, and a profitable advertising agency. Besides health insurance coverage, the family had only paid 20,000 yuan to the hospital. And the head of the company Xiaotongren is said to be a close friend who did this for publicity. Internet users have responded with fury, accusing Luo of fraud.
My situation is not that bad. I have a house in Shenzhen, and a car, and another house in Dongguan.
Luo is now to give back over 2 million yuan in donations, and so will the company. But Luo R is not the first to profit from sympathy. Charitable crowdfunding is growing in China. According to the China Charity Alliance, China's top 4 online donation platforms saw a 127% rise in small-scale donations. A survey by China Youth Daily showed around 47% of respondents have donated online, but only about 28% trust the platform, and up to 60% worry about the security of the processing. Luo Yixiao is still in hospital with real pain and tough moments. What Chinese hope now is the girl will recover and that her father's mistake will not stop people doing good.
So let's get a discussion started. Guests, let's talk about online charity. Easy to approach but hard to manage. So what exactly is online charity? How do you interpret it, Ms. Han? Is it a new format or it's just a change of technology?
It's both. And I think online charity actually happens, it can be traced back as early as to about 2009 and 2010. It's about 10 years later after the internet boom. So it's a natural technical development of everything going internet, just like we call it internet plus in every field, every industry. So it's a natural involvement of the traditional offline charity, and it goes online and makes people feel easier compared to the traditional offline charity to give money. Small money counts, and it's easier in terms of the technology used. You can give money whenever you want, whatever you want, and how much you want. And especially the beauty part is that you can give the money directly and more transparently to the programs and projects that you feel that they need most. So it's both.
Well, Edward, why it's easier compared to traditional charities?
Well, certainly, I mean, in traditional charities, you'd have to go to an institution, you'd have to figure out where is their bank account, and you'd have to have some sort of relationship with them. I mean, this is one that's introduced online, like Ms. Han said, and it's easily accessible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I think what the viewers have to keep in mind with regards to charities is that charity is a term of art. And I mean, they can say that empathy and charity are probably the greatest attributes of a human that can be done. So this is great that people are giving. But I think the general public doesn't understand what is a charity and what they're paying for sometimes. In some instances, and maybe in the instance with Mr. Luo R, where there's money being given, a very heartfelt story, and yet does that fall into the purview of what a charity is? So charity is kind of a term of art, and in China it means something very specifically.
So legally speaking, is online charity a completely new thing?
Yeah, I mean, legally there are laws, policies, and regulations that are now overviewing what can be done, and that there are banks that are cooperating, and these are all great strides. I mean, absolutely great strides. And I think that the emphasis should be on the idea that this is now available. I think that these concepts of charity are really well found foundations in other countries. It hasn't been so much in China because of the political setup of the country, but now that's something that's looked upon as a very positive thing, and I think the general public should look at it as a positive thing. I think that there's a lot of skepticism on charities, and there shouldn't be in this country. There's more successes, I think, than there are failures.
Right, Ms. Luo, you're a practitioner in charity for many years. So from your point of view, do you think Mr. Luo's case in South China's Shenzhen city is actually fraud?
There are many sides of this story. First, Luo just put on his article towards the sympathy and his sufferings, his sadness towards how can he afford towards the future cure treatment of his daughter. So this is one side as a father, but Luo's action, cooperating with a marketing company to do this kind of peer-to-peer contribution online is kind of tapping into the gray area of online donation, because people who have contributed to this, to appreciate his article, to give money to his daughter, is actually thinking they are doing something good, and they are giving the charity there through the online means. And also from the legal perspective, it is tapping into a gray area. If you are doing the peer-to-peer donation or appreciation, it's people who give the money should be taking the responsibility as to verify whether this is true, whether I want to help this girl, and whether I want to help with this family, especially in the wake of this family is not in that poor situation. It's more like garner the sympathy without information matching. And on the other side, the peer-to-peer donation is not that legal according to the Ministry of Civil Affairs. There are only 13 platforms, according to these agencies, that are legal and are responsible to garner this online donation in terms of the organizational activity. So I think, so that's why Luo, after consulting with this marketing company as well as the Civil Affairs agency in Shenzhen, they have to return, the money they have garnered to the public, to the general individuals.
Well, it's very interesting you mentioned those 13 government-appointed websites that can garner public fundraising, but many people just never heard of those websites. All the high-profile cases are from big social media platforms. What's the dilemma here?
Actually, I have my personal concern regarding the 13, first batch of these organizations who have the right or eligibility to do the online donation or online charity works. There are several categories. One, they are from some BAT companies. I think that's understandable because they have the large population, they have the big client base, so it's easier for them if they want to do something good, and if it's part of their corporate social responsibility, and it's their roles and responsibilities to cooperate with the government, with the public, to give more back to the society. And the other category is from the public foundations, the traditional public foundations like the China Social Welfare, like the Xinhua Net, which is understandable too, because they have their very big and sophisticated offline charitable works, and they have a very good track record. But the third category is making me feel a little bit curious about their criteria, because the third category is from the private companies who are capable of setting up this online donation platform, who are capable of their technological equipments and softwares and their capabilities, but who don't have a track record in terms of the traditional fundraising in the past. So like 公益筹, the general crowdsourcing in charity. So there are many actually small scandals, like people who are raising money for a particular case, but turns out these people who is raising money from this platform, they are really wealthy and they are making profits from this kind of crowdsourcing for the charity purposes. So for this category, I'm having my concerns. So I think the criteria needs to be made public to make people feel more trustworthy towards the online donation platforms.
Right, Edward. How much of a challenge do you think online donation, online charity pose for the current regulation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge for sure, and it's like almost a Sisyphean task. So you roll that rock up the mountain, and then it goes back down, and you roll it back up again, and it's an ongoing process. But I think that the idea is that at least there's a platform there, at least there's rules and regulations. I think for consumers and for people who want to do good, they should know that there's a beginning date and an end date, and that there should be criteria, and it should be set forth, and it should be transparent. Now, just going back to the gray area with Lowell R, is that the situation there was actually they were paying for an article that he was writing about his daughter. So it didn't really fall in the rubrics of charitable giving per se. So that's what the consumers or the general public don't really understand sometimes. What is under the Ministry of Civil Affairs, who actually oversees this kind of stuff for the country, and what is done by an individual for an article. But I mean, again, the idea is I don't think we should focus so much on the disastrous things, and those are the things that catch everyone's attention. That's what's news. Yeah. But the idea that there is giving and that the Chinese people are giving out, and I think it's possible. I do think that, it just more and more education needs to be done. Again, when people do things online, they do it out of a sense of immediacy and a sense of urgency, and the person who's giving actually feels better themselves. And it's a shame that people take advantage of that, and the government should come down on them. But I also think that there's a mix between sort of Kickstart and these kind of things where you're donating for businesses. This gets mixed into which charity as well, and so that's just a question of education, I think.
Well, Ms. Han, Edward just mentioned the issue of transparency. Do you think in transparency, online donation can do better than traditional charities?
Of course, and this actually should be the feature or the strength of online charity, because you can give money to the specific project or program that you like most. And why you like this most other than the other projects? Because you can see more information, pictures, the track record, where the money goes, etc. compared to the online provides this kind of platform and provides this transparency. And the beauty is that you can also reach out to a larger population than the offline charity works, so that a small project may be able, through their transparency, through they are able to be more public, to be able to providing more information, to garner even more money than they want. So this is the beauty. But also, like Edward just pointed out, there should be a clear distinction between peer-to-peer donations that you are out of your own preference to give money or to give appreciation in other maybe intangible love to this certain endeavor, or you should have some clear distinction and criteria with regard to transparency, data review, as well as other maybe the third-party proof, like for Laura's case. If he can attributes to the doctor's proof of her daughter's illness, the in-depth, as well as the other extent.
All details matter.
All details
Thank you very much for your input, guests. You're watching Dialogue on CCTV News. Stay with us. So let's continue the discussion on China's online charity. Well, Edward, we were talking about transparency. Are you as optimistic as Ms. Han in this particular field?
Well, I am, only because I think that more information and more understanding and more education is going to make all the sunlight makes everything clean. And I think that
multi-dimensions.
Exactly. And so I think that we're moving in the right direction. People would have access to it, and that will make it better than this very opaque system that might be in the old traditional system. I also agree very much with the idea of who is going to deliver the system, and that's what consumers should look at. Because I mean, it seems some people might say, "Oh, these old institutions don't know what they're doing." I think that there's people who want to do good, but then there's a question: how does one actually do good? It's not necessarily monitoring whether LOR has enough money or not. It's a question of, can things be delivered, and is there some kind of accountability with regards to it? And this is the dilemma that people have that are in the charity field, in the not-for-profit field. In America, we have that open. It's kind of open to the market, and the market is just saying what's a fraud, what's not a fraud. The other thing that we have is a tax donation. Once you give a donation to a charitable organization, you can get a tax donation. So there is some kind of parity. We don't have that yet in China, and that might be a step that they would move into, where charity would be encouraged for corporations and for individuals to get tax credits.
Right, and charity is all about public trust. Without trust, no one would donate any money to any charity. So do you think for online charity, there are any kind of experience can be learned from the traditional ways, Ms. Han?
I think the online and offline can be combined to some extent together.
But interestingly, nowadays, traditional charities seem very low-key.
Yes, that's right. Actually, there are two categories of traditional charities. One is categorized as public foundations, which they can make public events to raise money, and the other category, which is more active, is categorized as private foundations.
Right.
And legally, they're not allowed to raise money through public events. They can only raise money from friends and friends of friends. So this is
the Gates Foundation, asking the billionaires and millionaires to give all their money to friends.
Exactly. So, but for online donations, this two categories is not, there is no such a clear distinction between these two categories, or there is no clear line. So they can actually combine some, even for pure online donation charity platforms, they can have some offline activities and vice versa. So that at the end of the day, just like you point out, it's the public trust, it's the transparency, it's the data which matters. You have to provide information, enough information, third-party information, your self-audit information to the public who have given the money. The silver lining of LOR's case, or the other case of online charity, even their bad cases like the scandals, one is that how much lower can it be? The other part is that maybe this is good to have the people who are giving money, to be educated that you have to be responsible, even there is small amount of money, that you should be more responsible for this money, where it goes, and you should be more sophisticated in verifying, what kind of projects are really, the projects necessary or in the huge need.
Well, Edward, there's a legal technicality here, because I take a look at the charity law of China. It said very clearly that donation receivers must provide receipts to donors. But how can online donations do that? They just put a thank you banner? Is that
Yeah, it's hard to get the fapiao out of the WeChat.
Right.
But they are making accommodation for someone to be able to collect those.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
They're making up some, especially for those 13 organizations accredited by the minister. And you can combine your personal activity, or some organizations can cooperate with them, so that get some, enough receipts to be rewarded. And down the road, if it can be combined with some other agencies, like the tax agencies and other agencies, to have this data combined together, then a more transparent picture can be viewed.
Yeah, it's a tremendous power. I mean, what I'm encouraged by is that it's a tremendous power, even to raise the money for LOR and all that. And the facts on that particular case, it's hard to say. If you do have an apartment, do you have a house? you do have a daughter with leukemia. So it's really made, the decision should be made by the individual donors. But like I said, in that case, they're actually giving money for the article that he's written, which is like, we're talking about this gray area legal loophole. And then there's the other traditional ones which don't always turn people on, and then you've got the fast-paced young people, you know, these are the platforms. I get that too, but I also know, having dealt with charities for a long, long time, that one needs to be able to deliver what it is they're talking about, and it's very hard to do that. I think people have a good heart, but it's hard to be able to do that. And like I said, I think in China, the charities and charitable organizations are more regulated than most other nations, which is both good and bad. I mean, there's so many people, and there has to be accountability for that as well. But Ministry of Civil Affairs, quite conservative with regards to that.
But talking about utilizing of social media, we also see some very tricky elements. For example, on the app of WeChat, because in the Luo case in Shenzhen, he actually gains about, I'm not quite sure about this, the amount. It's half of his donations from this very function in WeChat app, which is a favorite or thumbs up function. Is that donation or not? But he still take it for granted, right?
We too just discussed about that. It's really a gray area. In particular, actually, it's just a function and a kind of appreciation to his article, not a donation, but when it can be such a large amount, you can categorize it as it's a peer-to-peer donation. So that's why in the later stage of this event, the civil affairs agency has to step in and call it a stop and try to figure out how to deal with this kind of money. So down the road, people need to be educated and to be more sophisticated. And if you are really appreciative of this article and you feel sympathetic for his daughter, you can continue, and you need to be responsible for your individual action. But if it is categorized as just a donation, then it needs the data, the proof, the transparency,
and the receipt.
And good point.
This function doesn't provide a receipt at all.
Good point. Receipts from all the way during the process.
So, Edward, do you think legislation should pick up in terms of regulating these very tricky elements?
I do. I think regulation, as well as with banking, which they're doing. So, like ICBC, for example, has a whole pathway on how to go ahead and make these donations to approved organizations, and that's starting to work. So, I think part of it is you've got a kind of draconian banking system which is cumbersome, and you've got a non-convertible currency. All these other issues are floating around. So I think part of it is the practicality. I do think that the regulators and the legislators want to make this work, but how do you make everybody safe when you're doing it? But I think not only the legislation, it's hard to legislate charity sometimes and how it works, but it's also the functions of financial institutions and the bricks and mortar moving into the 21st century.
As online charity is gaining momentum in China, have you seen more legal cases regarding this field?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have. I mean, there's.
What are they about, mainly?
Mostly we were discussing this just before the show, which is that the NGOs, foreign NGOs, are here, and so that there is a need, and they do have certain expertise. But then it's also getting to be, there's a new legislation that's coming down on January 1st that they have to change their structures, and so but it's not totally clear how to do it. So we're seeing a lot of formation questions, and we're seeing questions about both these public kind of organizations that are raising money, and then the sort of private ones that have a different function. So we're asked more on corporate structure and setup and how to function in it, not so much with regards to fraud. I mean, those are the ones that catch the headlines, but it's really the boring kind of day-to-day stuff on how does this function.
What's your take as a
it's not about a fraud. It's just even from the legislative perspective, it needs to be more sophisticated in terms of the detailed principles and guidelines towards how to distinct the private foundation as well as the public foundation through the online platform, and how people can be guided to do more contributions, but under a legal framework.
So where do you think China's online charity
is
headed?
Quite encouraging, from the figure. Just within this year, the 2016, the report shows that even for Tencent, they have this double nice days online charity donation events. the figure, the growth rate is about 400% compared to last year. And most of the donors are from the new generation, the internet generation from the late 80s or 90s. So the trend is really good, and I don't think it can be affected or affected hugely like the Guo Mei scandal several years ago. So the trend, I think, is really positive. But during this trend, people involved in this case, not only donors, the legislators, the regulators, as well as the foundations, they need to be more sophisticated.
So, Edward, what do you think this trend tells about the changing Chinese society?
I am so encouraged because, like I said, there's no duty to care in China. There's no Good Samaritan rule where you have to take care of people that are in your way, that get harmed. And I think that there's many cases where people don't try to help because they don't want to be involved. I think that the trend here with young people is so encouraging, and that it's gone up 400%, and that people are participating, and it's a completely new aspect. And so I'm totally encouraged by it. It's a long way to go, but I don't think people should be discouraged. I think people should be encouraged that this is happening, and the ease for what it's doing. And actually, the people power to help people is amazing on the internet.
Yeah, people power is crucial. So the good thing about young people is that they're tech savvy. They know how to use all the internet technologies, social media, everything.
Exactly.
But how to utilize, other people like middle-aged people or even senior citizens?
Oh, that's a very interesting question because they have more buying power or donation power. So I think, so that's why the online donation platforms, they should kind of learn from the traditional donation or foundations to see whether there are some offline activities can be involved so that the senior people can be included into this kind of trend.
Well, what's the experience in the United States in terms of utilizing older people to participate in a good cause?
Yeah, I mean, well, you look at Mr. Buffett, look at Mr. Gates. They're a little bit older and they're giving money away. So I mean, but even with Mark Zuckerberg, I mean, so this is kind of it's really the basis and the foundation a lot of times of the United States when it was even started. And I'm not saying it's good, bad, or indifferent, but that is a part of the fabric of the society. How they use it in the foundation, who knows? But the issue, I think, is again that people are encouraged to be giving, and what they would encourage. One thing is that there's been studies. People giving, they feel better about it. Almost than the people who receive it psychologically. Number two, that there's recognition. And so maybe this is where you recognize the online and offline. So the older folks there, when they do make a donation, that their name is somewhere on an online situation, and that they're getting some recognition. And so we're matching those two groups together. But it's certainly the media covers all that these folks do, and the media monitors, and these associations and foundations are indeed monitored that do have public disclosures. On how much is going to giving and how much is not going to giving. The Clinton Foundation has been through the ringer through the last election series. That's a foundation as well. So I mean, but it's a part of the society for sure.
After all, encouraging pictures ahead. Thank you very much, guest.
Thank you.
That's it for this edition of Dialogue on CCTV News. I'm Pan Zheng in Beijing. Bye bye.